Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay. Never comes again, another day like yesterday. Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay.
Hi, everybody. It's been a hot minute, and partially that's just been me being busy, which is great. A lot of that is just taking care of my kids, which I enjoy a lot, and my business being busy. But also, I know there's tons more spam now and really elegant ways of attempting to get your account information. But my social security number and some other details were out there, and I had some actually really targeted attacks and actual calls from hackers, real people on a phone attempting to convince me to open a cold wallet for Bitcoin and stuff like this, and then continued sometimes second by second attempts to hack some of my accounts that had been sitting there for 3 to 5 years, some stuff that I don't log into a lot. And so I spent probably a month and a half, 2 months just going around and cleaning everything up, and I ended up deleting that Gmail account. So I'm back again, and I feel a little rusty. I almost feel like I don't have language at the forefront of my mind. But I wanted to talk about something that really occurred to me the other day. That's something that people who recover from trauma, or people who are in the process of recovering from trauma, struggle with a lot. And it feels like when people come to therapy with severe developmental trauma, there's this disconnect between what they think they're supposed to feel and think and what they actually feel and think. And in the middle of it, there is this extreme discomfort for them because neither one of the things feels achievable. So let me be more concrete. And I've been through this same process myself. People who struggle with chronic PTSD, complex PTSD, whatever, usually have had quite a few years, sometimes decades of feeling crazy, and have had direct or gentle hints from some people well-meaning and some people not. There's like, you have real issues, and the way you think about stuff and the way you experience stuff is not normal, and you need help. So, this person develops a certain amount of shame and confusion, wonders about their own reality testing, because they are experiencing some intense nervous system responses to things that other people seem okay with. And so they come into therapy, and often there are two things that we all really crave. One is we would like for a therapist to go, you know what, you're not crazy. The way you perceive things is actually pretty accurate. And the other thing we want the therapist to tell us is, there's hope for you. We're going to do some treatment. We're going to do some work. And then you're going to feel and think the way most people feel and think. The people that you see working long hours at a job and not getting completely burnt out. Pardon me. The people you see who are okay in crowds or around loud sounds, who don't startle super easily and don't have problems with their nervous system getting, deeply overwhelmed. And so there's this huge disconnect of, there's the world as the traumatized person sees it, which they've come to believe that there's all these normal people, and that these normal people don't feel the things that they feel, and these normal people don't find the world dangerous, and these normal people can meet new people and just think, it's probably going to be okay. People are mostly nice, and yeah, it seemed like a really nice couple. We got to know them. And this is something the traumatized person struggles with. Like, oh, I got to know them and they made one little comment that sort of like struck a chord with me in a bad way. And then I was really nervous about it, and I felt paranoid about meeting them again. And they're like, I want to be that other person. I want to be those other people who Or like, yeah, the director at the company's a little off, but it's fine. It's basically a good gal or a good guy, whatever, and these people are just like, yeah, life is mostly safe. Like nothing's ever gonna, come on, bad things happen, but in general, they don't happen to me. Things are fine. Things are gonna be okay. And so the traumatized person really craves and wants and yearns for that normalcy and yearns to experience that, but at the same time is deeply, deeply convinced that life is fragile. Life is very, very fragile, and that the world is pretty dangerous, and that really bad things can happen to anybody. And that includes them because really bad things have already happened to them. And so they come into therapy, and it's this conundrum. I want to be validated that these really bad things happen and that the world is dangerous and I'm not crazy. And at the same time, I want to be like these other people who can just go about their business and don't seem to really notice warning signs and are not bothered by the news and they're not worried about who gets elected. And so it's an interesting position. And I'm going to say something to you that's going to veer into the spiritual that I would not have said in the first 10 or 15 years of working in the therapeutic community. I guess 10, 2013, yeah, so 10, 11 years. Was not something that I ever would have veered into, but this is JS Wonders, this is the podcast, so I get to say what I want, as long as it's not hateful or really cruel or mean. Those are my rules. Those are the rules of JS Wonders. You get to wonder about whatever you want to wonder. The truth is that the traumatized person is right. And that the people we consider normal, first of all, there are far fewer of them than you think, than the traumatized person thinks. The traumatized person, because they've been gaslit and they feel so alone with their own fear about the world, they feel so isolated that they start building this image in their head of this monolith of normal people who can work jobs and are not that worried about being in a big crowd. And, when a firecracker goes off, they're not like, oh my God, was that a gunshot? They're just like, it sounds like firecrackers, right? So they build in their head this idea that there's this monolith of normal people. Well, first of all, there isn't a monolith. Out of those quote unquote normal people, there are people who have had pretty reasonable lives and, their parents made some mistakes, but generally their childhood felt safe to them. And, they had fun and, never got bullied for 3 or 4 years in a row, like really horribly by a terrible person. Didn't get molested by a stranger or a family. Like, they didn't go through these things. And so some of them actually genuinely don't fear life that much. They don't struggle with anxiety or this underlying unconscious feeling that life is dangerous. Like you have to be careful all the time. You have to worry a little bit all the time. You have to be prepared, right? There's actually more people who exist in that than who exist in that quote unquote normal state, that monolith of people that really traumatized people begin to believe exist. But there are also in that group who appear normal, what the monolith of what traumatized people think of this normal population of generally sane and of balanced people, right? People who have balanced emotional, psychological states. There are also people who have gone through some real trauma and some real difficult times who dealt with it by going into denial. And they're even more fiercely defended around the idea that everything's fine, life is fine. You see this a lot more with men, so I think there's gender socialization. And you'll see anxious men marry anxious women. And the anxious women, maybe through gender socialization feel entitled to be anxious all the time and like, oh my God, what about this? And yeah, but the kids are gonna, yeah, but did you talk to the teacher? And those men, many of them are not even aware of how anxious they are just constantly, oh, it's fine. It's fine. Oh my God, like, it's fine. It'll be fine. Why, but the truth is they are anxious, but they've been socialized to completely deny their basic agitated and anxious state. And I'm hiding something in here that no one wants to hear, but any couples therapist, most therapists who are paying attention, and one of the primary family systems theorists, Bowen, stated this, and I can tell you anecdotally from watching couples and families and whatever, this is absolutely true, no matter how much you feel like denying it. If you think you're the stable one in your relationship, is when people attach long term, people match anxiety levels, people match anger levels. If you have a partner with an anger issue, you also have an underlying unconscious anger issue that you suppress, and then you've chosen someone who puts you in a position where you have to be angry about the fact that they're angry all the time. But you think your anger is justified because you chose someone who's angry. And you're like, but they're angry. You see the same thing in addiction. You'll see a family with a parent who's severely addicted, has severe addiction, and is incredibly destructive, and the spouse will be the victim of this thing, and it's like it's terrible, and they struggle with it. And if you really get under the hood, if you solve that person's addiction problem, or they solve it, what you realize is that spouse is as addicted to the chaos and the codependency and the insanity of having the addict there as the addict is addicted to the chemical. And you will see, right, those people are absolutely convinced that the spouse of the addict is absolutely convinced that the problem is the addict. And they're even more unconsciously, the addict usually at least admits that they have a problem. But the person who's addicted to having an addict in their life and totally codependent and horrible boundaries and completely enmeshed and constantly making their entire life about the addict is as addicted to that role as the addict is addicted to the chemical that they introduce into their system. You don't want to believe it. Nobody wants to believe it. Nobody, like, man, that pisses people off, because there are many of us, for a long period in my own marriage, where we're convinced that we're a victim of the blind spots of our spouse, whoever our deep attachment partner is. We're all convinced that we're a victim of our partner's blind spots. I guarantee you're not. You chose it and you put up with it because it gives you a position that you're comfortable with, that's normal. Maybe you're not comfortable with it, but it's normal for you. It's your normal. And you are as compulsively attached to that as your partner is attached to their abrasive behavior, their unconscious behavior, whatever it is that they're doing that annoys the crap out of you. Now, what you should do about that, go consult your couples therapist or, whatever. I'm not here to pretend to be therapeutic for you. I'm just talking over a microphone in a podcast. I don't even remember where this diverged to go in this other direction. But it's fall, it's dark and overcast, and my brain gets mushy, and my recall of words isn't as good, and I don't track as well. But what in the hell were we talking about? Oh, we were talking about traumatized people being caught between these two paradigms of the normal person. Oh, that's where I got there. As I was talking about among the monolith of what appear to be normal functional people to the traumatized person who's struggling with functioning. In this monolith, there are some people who have had generally nice lives, or at least good enough lives, that life is not impossibly difficult. But there are some people who have had really difficult lives in that group who, in response to that trauma, have developed a deep callousness to the problems of life. And there is a sort of, from my subjective perspective of watching clients, there is a gender tendency that those tend to be men. And then that's how we got into the conversation of couples, is because those men will choose anxious wives or anxious partners, and then they themselves are anxious. They have a deep unconscious anxiety that makes them irritable and makes them, they have, their patience is in short supply, and then they choose a wife that just wears the shit out of their patience. And they're just all about how anxious their wife is, but they don't realize that they chose her because they also are an anxious person. Right? So that's how we got into the conversation. But in that monolith, there are lots of also traumatized people. It's not really a monolith, who are just like, oh, it's fine. And they constantly deny the seriousness of what happens in the world, or they'll be dismissive. It's like, yes, that can happen, but like it never happens. Yes, you can drown swimming in the ocean, but people swim in the ocean all the time. Like, what's your problem? Like, and they're not able to, if you actually address a reasonable concern with them, they're dismissive. And so their relationship to dealing with life being life and knowing that there are risks and things of concern is to be dismissive across the board. But the traumatized person who's really frightened of life doesn't see that. They just see someone as stronger than them and more balanced and well-adjusted than them, who doesn't seem to be frightened by life, when in fact that person is very frightened by life and they're in denial about it. All right. So back to the original direction of the podcast. You have the person who is consciously traumatized. They struggle to function because they're overwhelmed with how dangerous and fragile life seems. And they're overwhelmed with the knowledge that this can happen to me. There isn't anything special about me. Really bad things have already happened to me. It can happen to anybody. It can happen to your child. It can happen to your spouse. Like, there ain't nothing special about any one of us. And so they walk around feeling really uncomfortable. And then they look at this monolith and they're like, simultaneously, they feel like these people are full of crap. Like, it really frustrates them, and it invalidates the trauma person, because they feel like, well, there's only two things that could be true. Number one, I'm right, and these people are all full of crap, and they'll say that in therapy over and over. They'll flip into that position over and over, like, people are full of crap. Like, I don't get it. Like, I was telling them they should worry about this or that, or this is going on, and they don't get it. Like, I just feel like people are not paying attention, or they don't care, right? These people are full of crap. They don't understand. They'll say that, or the shame comes back on the traumatized person. What's wrong with me? Why can't I be like these people? How come these people are walking around okay, and they're not like anxious and worried all the time and struggling with every new situation they go into? They're not ramping up to this fight or flight and intense anxiety of what's going to happen and who are these people and how are they going to behave, and really getting these massive blaring warning signals when someone makes an off-color comment or whatever. These people are full of crap. Why can't I be like these people? Therapists, help me. Validate that these people are full of crap. They don't understand what life is really like and what can really happen, and help me be them. I was there. I spent many years working as hard as I could to normalize, which in a backhanded way is a way of shaming yourself and saying, yes, so you're not normal and you're not functional and the way you think is not valid and what your perception of what you experienced is not valid. No, it is. Some of us have experienced some pretty intense things, some pretty difficult things, you know? So you have this conundrum. Now I'm gonna make a statement that I think is reasonable to make psychologically. And then it's gonna veer into something that's maybe more spiritual that, right? Which is what JS Wonders is for. I talk a lot about psychology because that's my area of expertise, but my interest is philosophy, spirituality, logic, ethics, whatever, physics, whatever. I don't care. I like thinking about it. What are you going to do? And then I come on here and I talk about it. The truth is, the traumatized person has a far more accurate perception than the people over here, even though they're not really a monolith. The person who over there who's traumatized, and often male and has been socialized to deny their own anxiety and fears, but also just to deny risk. That's fine. It's fine. Oh my God. Like with this again, it's fine. It's fine. Right? That's an anxious person who's turned off their warning signals so they don't have to deal with it. But they're anxious. Make no mistake. The traumatized person is right. I've thought about this for decades. Life is fragile. Within the context of what this is, life is fragile and dangerous. And we are, as a fact, as a logical fact, susceptible to some terrible things that none of us wants. And there's nothing about you or me that means that it can't happen to you or me. It can and it does. And the traumatized person is right. Those people who had relatively nice, safe childhoods, they lack information. If they walk around, look, I used to struggle with this for years, probably decades. The knowledge that it's a scientific mathematical fact that right now somewhere there's a child being tortured to death. Somewhere there's a dog being beaten to death for the fun of it because there's some psychopath who that's fun for them. That's a fact. It's a fact. It can make you really uncomfortable. It can be really, really disturbing. But really horrible things are happening all over the globe 24 hours a day. And the traumatized person knows that and feels that as a present reality in their body. They were introduced to the fact that even people who seem good or who are good can do terrible things out of deep ignorance and a cruelty that they've learned at the hand of other cruel people or ignorant people or unaware people. That's a fact. So you can be, let's say you're part of that monolith, or let's stop calling it a monolith because I don't think that's accurate. There's many varied versions and perceptions and awarenesses. You can be the person who's like, oh my God, like how can you think that way? It's so typical. Hey, man, you are confused. That's part of reality. There's nothing you can do about it. And I'm not interested in sitting here telling you horrible story after horrible story, because then I turn it on in my body and in my mind, and then I make my day about that, and I choose not to. And we'll talk about how that works for people recovering from trauma. But I remember watching a nature program, and I've used this story many times, watching a nature program, and it was about rhinos, how massive and how incredibly powerful they are, and how they often spend time just sort of floating a body of water because it takes, the water buoys them up a little bit and they can cool and blah, blah, blah. And that the males are very aggressive and they have these gargantuan battles and, contests of will. And as they were filming this, in one of these, by accident, a baby rhino was gored in the gut in the middle of a fight. And it sort of did what it could to scramble out. And if they didn't show it, which thankfully, but I know enough about ways to die and gut wounds that you have to know that that baby died an excruciating extended death. The people filming didn't go and put it to sleep. Like, they don't do that. You can't be a wildlife photographer and decide. I mean, you can if you like, whatever, but mostly they don't, because they see lots and lots of scenes of misery and suffering every time a predator takes down prey. You think that prey is having fun? That shit's happening all the time around the world, 24 hours a day. So, I watched that, and that stuff used to bother me a lot. It still bothers me as I talk about it. But the deep realization is, at the time I was really struggling with chronic PTSD that just tormented me constantly, and I was barely able to function. But I had enough hope, and I had made enough ground through therapy and through meditation that I was beginning to have hope that I could really conquer this problem. I could solve this problem. And while I was in that position, I almost had this magical belief that life owed me a chance to solve the problem, that everything was going to go great from then on, that I was just somehow owed a life without problems because I had already struggled so desperately for like 30, 35 years that I was now owed 35 years of relative lack of problems. And it's like, that's not how life works. You can struggle for 35 years and then die on the day after the 35, like, or have something horrible. That's just a fact, right? I mean, there are no guarantees of anything. You can have a long string of bad luck and everyone can go like, oh my God, how could all that stuff happen to one person? Because it does. Randomly, it does. Sometimes. So my realization was, there isn't any significant difference between me and that baby rhino. That baby rhino isn't like, oh, you just like dumb animal, it doesn't matter. No, it matters. It matters. It matters when any creature suffers terribly. It matters. And I'm not more important than that baby rhino. I want to be. It's more important to me. If it was me or the baby rhino, I'd choose to not. That's really not fair. That's not right. But it's a basic animal instinct in me of like, I don't want to die a terrible death. But there isn't anything. So people who come from complex trauma or long periods of trauma understand at a very gut instinctive level that life is fragile and dangerous and anything can happen to anybody. There's nothing that guarantees that you get to get through this without something bad happening and ending your life. Like, whatever. I don't want to invoke it. Right? There are these slightly superstitious feelings of like, well, I don't want to sit there and think about it. I want to draw it to me if that's a thing. Traumatized people know this. Those people who had relatively nice lives have very limited perceptions and understandings of what's possible. Good for them. I'm glad. But if you lived through trauma, you can't forget what's possible. I'll relay one other anecdote that I think I've relayed before that was a very significant experience I had. I was probably 19. Maybe I was 20, working as a veterinarian assistant or technician or whatever. And some dogs would come in with mange or some skin condition where they're itching and miserable and their hair is falling out. And sometimes it's just maybe a fungus or just dry skin. But a lot of times there are these skin mites. There are these little tiny microscopic creatures that will burrow into the animal's skin and make their home and just irritate the crap out of them. And you have to give them a medicated bath to kill the skin mites. And so in order to determine that, you would take the dog and you would take a razor blade or a scalpel and kind of like do a skin scraping and scrape off to get a little bit into painful, a little bit, just a little bit beneath the top layer. And you'd put that in some mineral oil on a slide and you'd put that under the microscope and turn on and you'd look. And I had learned to identify these different types of mites. So I could go to the doctor and say, hey, doc, this is whatever. I don't remember the names of them, but I learned it at the time. This is this mite, and so this certain sort of dip or bath, medicated bath, is going to handle that problem. So that's what the dog needs. And I remember getting busy, putting one on the microscope with the light on, getting busy, and then coming back and go, I'm going to look at it again because the doctor really wanted me to memorize and make sure that I knew the different types of mites. And this particular one was the sort of thing that instinctively humans look at and go, oh my God, like, ugh. You know, it's some mixture of a crab-like, spider-like creature, the sort of thing that just makes you creep out, gross out, kind of like weird little pinchers and, you know, weird little segmented body with a bunch of legs. And you're like, I give you the heebie-jeebies. I always had a deep sense of sympathy for any living thing, so I wasn't entirely just like, oh, gross. But it doesn't look attractive, right? At least not to a human. So I went back after 15 or 20 minutes and I looked and it had been moving languidly in the, you know, and then I went back and looked and I saw these frantic, like juddering, scrabbling movements. And I realized, well, the light shining up through the microscopic slide was hot and it was heating the oil. So this thing was cooking alive in there and it was suffering. It was dying a terrible death. And that bothered me. And I really thought it through, and I thought through how dismissive humans are, where we'll be like, well, you know, they're not a higher primate. They don't have a developed nervous system. They don't really feel, it's just an autonomic response and blah, blah, blah. Look, guys, I don't want to get into that because that's like an hour-long diatribe for me, but humans are full of shit. You hear how convenient that is, that you convince yourself that crabs don't suffer so that you don't feel bad when you eat one. Or that you don't feel bad that a lobster gets dropped into boiling water alive. Hey, have no fucking confusion about it. We are pretty sociopathic when it comes to other life forms. There isn't anything about that that's okay. You're torturing that thing to death. Yeah, don't get confused. If you want to do it, go ahead. I'm not one of these people who's going to sit here and browbeat you, blah, blah. I'm into morality and ethics, and I'm into being clear about what a thing is. I'm as full of shit as everybody else. I've eaten meat for a couple decades now, and I know how shitty the meat industry is. I know it is because my dad was a biochemist who went into slaughterhouses, abattoirs, or whatever the hell you call them, and tested, and it is not, man, it is bad. Like what they're doing to animals when you do industrial farming is bad. Man, it's bad. You shouldn't do that to any living creature. I don't mean like woo woo, like I grew up in a hunting culture. I don't have a problem with people hunting, you know, with a clean kill, take an animal down with a shot through the heart or the lung. Like, you know, they're going to get eaten by a predator. That doesn't make it okay. But I'm just saying, I'm not Mr. Sensitive woo-woo who's like, I'm telling you, it's actually bad. And if you try to make excuses and pretend it's not, you're full of crap. You're just doing what's convenient for you, and you're just easing your own moral angst and discomfort. And I do the same things you do. I don't have any moral position on you. I'm just not interested in lying about it. So don't lie to yourself. Don't do that shit where people are like, well, they don't experience suffering the way humans do because shut up. If I drop you into boiling water or a lobster into boiling water or that skin mite into boiling oil, you're going to have the same fucking experience. And you're going to die the same way. And it's horrible. Okay, I'm going to try not to go off on that because that one just really pisses me off. I could do like 4 or 5 episodes saying the same thing over and over and over. I hate that self-serving crap where it's like, well, because it's convenient for me and I like the taste of crab and it's part of my culture, not mine, but people are like, oh, they convince themselves that it's not a sociopathic act to shell crabs alive or to drop a live animal into boiling water. Hey, go ahead, do whatever you're going to do. I am no moral I promise you, I am no moral authority, but don't bullshit me and I won't bullshit you. We're both full of shit. We both hurt things. We both participate in the torture of living things. I'm not interested in pretending anything otherwise. Okay. Come back to the story. I digress. So I had this realization of like, man, there isn't any ethical, moral way. Like, even if you say, oh, you don't know, you're anthropomorphizing. You don't know that I'm anthropomorphizing any more than I know that, right? I'm not that skin mite. I don't know for a fact that it's suffering, and you don't know for a fact that it's not. So what's a more moral position? Me going, it's probably suffering, I choose not to do it. Or you going, oh, it's fine because it's convenient for me, so I'm just going to assume that it's not. That's bullshit. When I say it out loud, you know what it is. So I had this realization, man, there's like all kinds of suffering, and that we tell ourselves all the time that these other creatures don't suffer, and they do. They do. Like when I'm in terrible pain and I'm like writhing and holding my stomach or feel like I can't stop moving because, oh my God, this hurts so bad. Like people are going to look at me and go, oh my God, he's in a lot of pain. And then you put an animal under the same circumstances, or you put an insect under the same and you see exactly the same movements and the same energy. And you're like, oh, but they're not feeling it. Shut up. Yes, they are. It is a very reasonable, logical step to assume that they are. So my realization was, man, there's an enormous amount of suffering, and suffering I can't do anything about. The Jains are a religious group in India that when they walk anywhere, they sweep the ground in front of them because they don't want to step on an insect, and they won't even eat fruit with seeds because that's the life force of that plant or that tree which intends to express itself. So they have to eat special things that don't consume any of their life. Well, I'm not a Jain. Like, that's logical. That's actually logical. They're doing everything they can to not inflict pain and suffering. I'm not willing to do it. I drive a car. Like, how many insects do you kill when you drive a car? Yeah, okay, I'm full of crap, but I know I'm full of crap. Like, I know I go around killing things all the time. Anytime we find a spider or some insect in our house, like, we try to put it out and not kill it. But sometimes we get really bad ant infestations, like ground nests, and they'll just pour into our kitchen, and I'll spray neem oil and water and liquid soap, and it does a really good job of deterring them. It does kill the ones it gets on. They just come up in another way and another way and another way. And at some point, we have to call exterminators and be like, and they come and they poison them. They give them a poison that those ants take back into the nest, and it just kills all of them. Do I think that's okay? I don't think that's okay. I'm just not willing to lie to myself about it and be like, well, they don't feel anything. The fuck they don't. Man, I'm cussing a lot today. I apologize for that. I'll try to pull back on it. So let's come back to, right? I had this realization that it's like, man, there's an enormous amount of suffering that goes on amongst every species, every living thing. I recently read a book called The Hidden Life of Trees. It's amazing. I love trees. And I always wanted to believe the ideal that they're these peaceful, beautiful plants just sitting there exchanging carbon dioxide and oxygen and making the air clean for us. Well, it's this beautiful thing. And this guy is amazing, the guy who wrote The Hidden Life of Trees. It's really interesting. I recommend it. But you read it and you realize that they're struggling desperately from beginning to end like everything else. They're struggling desperately for a chance for an extended life, a life that's a normal lifespan, and many of them don't make it. And many of them suffer things that really, really bother them. Insect infestations, and they're things that kill them, and because they don't kill them fast, we have no idea. It's like when you're a kid and, remember aspen, it's like you can sort of like cut into the bark. They have this square paper-like bark that you can peel off, and there's this very white inner core. You used to do that as a kid. It was cool, and carve your initials or whatever. It's like, that's really dangerous for the tree. The bark is how they protect themselves from fungal infections and from insect infections. And when you do that, so like very often you just killed that tree. Now it happens over the next 20 years, so you don't know, but it's suffering that demise. So the people who come from severe trauma, extended trauma, they know the truth. It is true that life is full of suffering. And the traumatized person, the reason they struggle with depression and anxiety and hopelessness is because at a young age, they've been introduced to the fact that bad things can happen to them, often perpetrated by people who supposedly love them. And that they can go out in the world and there's nothing to stop more bad things from happening. And then those people sometimes have more bad things that happen. Sometimes there are psychological reasons where, their boundaries have been torn down and their warning signals are scrambled. And so people get into more trouble because they don't even know how to read risk anymore. They completely turn it off or they overreact, and then they manage and suppress their own overreaction, which mutes their instincts. So you ever see a traumatized person and that they just seem to like walk into further traumatizing things, and people get really frustrated and they're like, look, at some point I feel like I can't even empathize anymore. It's like, okay, you had a bad childhood, but shit, you're like 35, you're still doing this crap. Like, learn to say no already. That person isn't just sort of pathologically like, oh, I just can't wait to suffer again. What happens for them is the PTSD is so intense and they constantly have these like warning signals going off. Well, they can't function that way. They can't get through a normal job. They can't just sit there and react to their boss or their colleagues or their kid. So they learn to suppress this basic instinct that keeps screaming at them. But then when they need it, it's suppressed. And they'll go into a situation and they'll be like, I don't know, it seems sort of weird. The guy was sort of weird. I went to pick up this sofa off of Craigslist, but I don't know, like I feel that way in a lot of situations. So I just sort of went forward with it and boom, they get robbed. And you're like, oh man, like you had a weird feeling. You went and visited some person's house with cash in some out of the way place on Craigslist. You're not smart enough to know. No, it's not about them being smart enough. It's that they're reality testing and their basic instincts, they have to suppress it all the time because it's screaming bloody murder at them 24 hours a day. They couldn't get through a job. They couldn't get through a relationship. They couldn't have a conversation. They can't go to coffee with somebody unless they suppress that. And so, there are people who then re-experience trauma because they've had to suppress their risk management instincts. I was very, very, very blessed. I felt entitled enough to my anxiety that I listened. It made my life very, very, very small, but I was in a lot of risky, somewhat risky situations, and I never suffered anything bad as an adult. I mean, my life as an adult, other than struggling with chronic PTSD and whatever, was incredibly charmed. So lucky, so lucky. I've been so lucky that no other things happened. Um, playing clubs for years, being out late at night, being in strange cities, traveling by myself, and making choices when I look back, I'm like, maybe that was not the best choice. I trekked in the Annapurnas in Nepal by myself. And I'm into, wow, like I have a bunch to dump on you guys. I'm into storytelling today. So I'll eventually get to the point if you don't mind. This is one of my favorite experiences. I was trekking by myself and I was young and stupid. So, it's sort of silly. I was like trekking into the Annapurnas as high as you can go without needing assistance, oxygen assistance, whatnot. And I got a little bit of altitude sickness when I look back on it. I was feeling really fatigued and a little flu-like, but I was young and in really good shape. I'd only brought 2 pairs of pants, 3 pairs of socks, 2 t-shirts, a down jacket, and a beanie, and a thin little blanket called a gabi, which is like this very, very thin blanket that goat herders and such in Ethiopia wrap around their shoulders when they go out in the chill of the morning. That's what I brought. And so I'm trekking into the Annapurnas, where you stop by, there'll be like the entire day, there'll be one little village where for $2 or $1.50, you can stay in some hut or a tin shack with a mattress and you just lay down on it. And I would put all my stuff on, 3 pairs of pants, my boots, my 2 pairs of pants, 2 shirts, my jacket, my hat, and I would pull the gabi over me and lay down on that mattress. And by the time I reached any kind of elevation at all, I didn't sleep for like at least 2 nights straight. I'm just fucking freezing. Oh, the stupidity. Okay. And then there was no hot water, so you'd get up and like wash off under the pump and with that water, the freezing cold water, and like get dressed and go trekking off. And I trekked to the highest point. There's a place where you get up at 4 in the morning and go sprinting up to this highest point and watch the sunrise over the Annapurnas. Too bad for me, it was socked in. There was nothing to be seen, but I did it just to do it and came back down. And suddenly there was this huge rainstorm. And so all the smart people were like, well, we're going to hole up in this little community here, little village here until it stops raining. And, you're going to see various other trekkers, right? Even if I'm by myself, you're seeing various other trekkers. And I had limited time and I really wanted to get to the south of the country, which is more like India, more tropical. There are tigers and, whatnot. And there's a jungle, there's a national jungle. And so I didn't want to get caught up there. So I decided, you know what, I'm Oregonian. I'm going to do it. I'm just going to go down in the rain. And I started trekking down through the forest, down the mountain. And it was raining so hard that at some point I really realized I have no idea if I'm on a path. I have no idea if I'm on a path. I'm on a mountain in the Annapurnas. I'm not familiar with this. Like, I was following kind of other people and following the path on the way up where there are like stone steps cut into the mountain and bridges over rivers and, whatever. And on the way down, there's just mush. I think and you feel a little bit of a panic of like, shit, man. And then I thought through some things. It's like, I know one thing from childhood, having grown up in the mountains or whatever, follow running water. People congregate around water, and water is also always going to make its way down to civilization. It's going to do that. Right. So maybe I'll run out of food and what, but let's say I went without water for 2 days. Like, I could get down. It had taken me a day and a half to trek up. I can, like I could, but I really panicked, and I had this really cool thought, and it was one of the most liberating experiences and thoughts I ever had in my life. And I realized, as I stood there in the middle of the jungle, or rainforest is maybe a better description, in the Annapurnas, completely alone, I realized that at that moment, no one in the world, because I was not expected back by my people in Los Angeles because I was going to go from there on to do some more traveling. I was going to go to Koh Samui, Phuket. I realized at that moment that nobody in the world, including me, knew where I was. It was pretty terrifying, but also at that moment, it was the most freeing experience I ever had. It was like at that moment, I truly was only what I was, a human animal. Whatever it was whatever it was that I am, without social expectations, without plans, without anything. There was nobody watching, nobody knowing, nothing. Nobody would even have known that I was missing for at least a week and a half. There was nobody in Nepal waiting for me. Maybe the people at the hotel at some point would be like, wait a minute, this guy never came back. We need payment in Kathmandu. I don't even know why I told you the guy said story. My brain is very mushy this morning, but to come back to the point, life is dangerous. That is true. Anything can happen to anybody. I told that because I was telling stories about traumatized people not having good risk management. Not having good risk management. I got lucky. That was not good risk management. It wasn't. That was not good risk management. So we come back to traumatized people are right. The people who actually are unaware of how fragile and dangerous life is, it is an unawareness. It is an ignorance of. The other people who are traumatized and in denial, they're anxious, but they're in denial, and they've imposed this childlike perception, idealized perception that everything's fine, because that's all they can deal with. And that's also because their pride and their ego, that makes them feel like, well, I'm not an anxious person. My spouse is anxious. These other people are just always worried about, like, I don't worry about it. It's fine. But they're not fine. Trust me. The traumatized person is right. And they will never make it back to the place where they feel that life is so assured, right? They're never going to be that person who had the charmed childhood, who doesn't feel that life is fragile and risky for everyone and anything can happen to anybody. They'll never be that person. You, traumatized person, are right in your perception that life is fragile and that there's lots of things that can happen. There's lots of risk. You're right. You're right. And also, so you don't aspire to be those people. You can't. You can't unknow what you know. Right? Don't shame yourself into like, well, they're the healthy, functional people. Yeah, they're able to be more functional the same way an animal is really fun. You can have an animal that feels really proud and strong and has lots of like chutzpah and, whatever. because that animal has managed, maybe it's a successful predator, but man, predators die horrible deaths all the time. A predator breaks a leg or gets a bad scratch and an infection and they're done. But that animal just doesn't know. They're not built to sit there and worry about that. Right? So those people are kind of like that animal. They function pretty well, but they function in denial. And that's okay. I'm not here to try to strip their denial away. I'm not here to force someone to deal with how torturous it is to dunk a lobster in boiling water. I'm just a little old human. I'm not here to save the world. I can't, there's nothing I can do to stand against all the suffering in the world. Okay, so traumatized person, you're right. Those people are in denial. You are a little bit alone. You feel alone and isolated, right? Because you see this monolith, but it's not really monolithic. It's a lot of people in denial. And society has trained people to be in denial about what life is because that works for society. Then people are willing to go to jobs they don't like and to get into debt and to put up with crap. Because if you really knew how risky and how fragile and how beautiful life was, you probably wouldn't put up with half the crap that society needs you to put up with. So it serves society for people to be in denial or to at least act like they are, or to brainwash them into being in denial and to denying the fragility and the beauty and the preciousness of their own time as a conscious being and each living thing as a conscious being. It serves society to manage that, right? They need people going to jobs, making money and consuming shit. Get busy. Okay, so you're right, traumatized person. Life is fragile and there's a lot of risk out there. So you go, oh, crap, John, what are you saying? Like, okay, so that's it? The traumatized people who walk around in a state of PTSD, feeling paranoid and overwhelmed, and it screws up their reality testing and their basic risk management instincts because they have to suppress this urgent, these bells going off in their head all the time, danger, danger, like, and then they get in more like, okay, that's it for them. That's it. They're the people who are right. And they're going to walk around that way. No. Here's the part that is psychological, but also maybe spiritual. I'm not saying that people got traumatized for the purpose of this. I'm not saying God went, oh, you're going to have a horrible childhood and I'm using you. Like, I don't have an opinion. I've said this over and over and over. I'm not a spiritual leader. I'm just thinking through shit. That's all. And sharing it with you guys. But it is a fact, and I'm saying this as a therapist, that everyone who's gone through serious trauma or medium trauma or whatever, difficult experiences, there is beautiful wisdom that comes out of it. And you don't have to walk around feeling hyper triggered and paranoid and suppressing your own basic risk management instincts 24 hours a day to just struggle through life for the rest of your life. You don't. And here's how it gets metaphysical and partially psychological, but also maybe spiritual. And here's how it worked for me. At some point, I had to just go, I can't do anything about it. And I can't think about it all day. I can't sit here and just feel tormented, that I feel tormented. And I know that there are animals and plants and children and people unjustly undergoing horrible things. And often that's all they have. There are 3-year-olds who, there was a case in LA County of a 4 or 5-year-old who underwent terrible torment and beating and neglect until he was finally beaten to death by his psychopath parents at the age of 5 or 6. That's it. That's all he got. That's it. That's it. Misery, no love, no care, no fun, no excitement, just misery and pain and suffering and a deep yearning to be loved and cared for and hugged. And then that's it. That's all. That's all he got. I can't spend my life immersed in that as a reality. So the first thing that the traumatized person has to do is not accept that those things happen, like, oh, somehow that you give it permission. And people who come from trauma often feel that way because we're angry at the people in our community who were present when we were being traumatized and nobody knew and nobody did anything. Or maybe people knew and they didn't know what to do and they didn't do anything. So to us, it feels permissive to accept that it's happening. But first you have to accept that it's happening and you can't do anything about it, not because you're being permissive, but because you're just one humble, lowly life and consciousness. And that it was not given to you to heal and protect the entire world of living beings. It was not given to you. It was not given to you to take it into your body and into your brain and to suffer the torment of the entire human race and every child and every animal and every puppy and every insect and every tree and every plant and every amoeba, every living thing that struggles and suffers. It was not given to you to take it into your body and live it. It will make you crazy and you will become a shitty person who hurts other people. That's a fact. It was not given to you to contain it in your body or to solve it. It was given to you to know that it's true. Now here's the part that really gets spiritual. If you want it to be. How do you move forward? Those people are in denial. They don't know how dangerous life is. They don't know how fragile it is. They don't know that anything can happen to anybody. And lots of good things happen too. Lots of amazing things happen. And you can even bias your life in favor of amazing things happening, right? There's way more. Let's not get totally depressed about the thing. Let's not make reality look like it's only that. It is all of those other things too. It's beauty and it's love and it's courageous people and it's people taking an opportunity to help an animal or to help a person or to help a child or jumping in and fostering a child and then adopting a child and loving that child for the rest of their life and making that child theirs. All of it. It's all here. All of it. The traumatized person first has to accept it was not given to me to take all of this into my brain and my body. Number one. I can be small and humble. I can be helpless because we all are. I'm not God. You're not God. I'm not the savior of the universe. I'm not the savior of all reality. You're not either. You can let go. And then you can start with the one thing that you have been given charge of. Your biology, your psychology, and your experience. And you can start pouring all of that energy of fear and worry and torment, and I mean torment not dismissively, but really it torments people to sit here and think and know, to think about the baby rhino, to think about the skin mite, to think about the trees, to think about the children, like all of the suffering that goes on all the time. Rather than bringing all that torment and misery, why don't you take care of the one thing you have been given? You have been given a life, one life, yours. You've been given one life, yours. I've been given one life and one body and one brain and one heart, two eyes if you want to keep doing the anatomy, two ears. Maybe I've ruined some of them in the process of living. This ear is not what this ear is. Broken this hand, broken that leg. You've been given a period of time to be conscious in this reality. How about you put all that energy and all that focus into making this experience as beautiful as possible, as loving as possible, as connected as possible, as creative as possible, as inspired. And I don't mean inspired in some, woo-woo BS way. People are immediately like, oh, I want to be of service to people. Yeah, that's beautiful. But a lot of times when we're saying that, we're full of crap. How about you be of service to yourself? How about you take care of the one thing that you were given, that you have actually been made responsible for? Your brain and your body and your heart and your experience and your presence. And how about you make sure that that is the most beautiful, connected, loving thing that anyone who comes within your sphere experiences? Just start there. Just start there. And get better at that. And get better at that. And then if you start going like, oh my God, like I did that, I was meditating and I felt loving and kind, and I was taking better care of my clients or my family and blah blah. And then after like 6 months, all of a sudden I realized like, oh my God, I'm so stressed out, I'm exhausted. And because you shifted again to trying to save the world and save everybody else, and you abandon the one thing that you have been given to be responsible for. You have been given this to be responsible for. You have been given this. The only caveat is if you have kids. Now you added them. You're also responsible for them. You've been given this. You're not responsible for anything. Just do this. And the longer you do it and the more committed you are to caring for your own state so that you can experience joy and curiosity and love and pleasure and interest and engagement and connection and creativity, the longer you invest, you will find that as that flows, that will become of great benefit to others. You want to contribute to the world? Okay, this is the cliche. You have to, and people are like, okay, start with me. But within a week, they're like off again, like saving the world and being miserable. Nobody needs it. Nobody wants it. Knock it off. You're not big enough. I'm not big enough. Nobody is saving the world. It was not given to you to do. You were given this. This is your task. This is what you need to do. And there are many traumatized people, myself one of them, who some people become very self-interested, what we call narcissistic, and other people become narcissistic in another way. We become very codependent, and we're always about helping and being really kind and really warm and blah, blah, blah. And that worked for me for a long time until I realized that I was a little bit full of shit. That in being really kind and really warm all the time and being the one amongst the whole group of friends that people could come talk to and confide in, and I was helpful and blah, 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 that I was also establishing this morally superior position from which I could still feel separated and not feel part of, and still feel scared and still feel separate from the human race, and not really let down and be a human being with my friends and be actually connected. So if you're compulsively forcing yourself to be of service all the time, but it really is an act of separation, you're not helping anybody. You're just codependent. You're just setting yourself up to be morally superior. You're just setting yourself up for this front. You have your mask. The fact that your mask looks nicer than the person who's angry and narcissistic doesn't make your mask any better. Didn't make my mask any better. I couldn't truly be of service to others until I chose to completely be of service to myself, enough that I felt enough courage to actually let other people experience me. The mess, the traumatized person, the confused person, the scared person, like all of it, the loving person, like none of the love and connection could come out if I didn't first stop being so goddamn diplomatic and kind. Physician, heal thyself. So traumatized person, you're right. The path forward is those people don't know, the people that you see as a monolith of people who are functional and they're not worried about every social situation and they're not worried that their kids are going to be harmed by some teacher at school. They're really not, they don't seem to have a lot of risk management issues. They seem kind of reasonable. It's like, okay, they're not going to let their 5-year-old kid go on a ski trip with some other family they don't know well. You'd be like, well, that's probably not a great idea. Right? You're right. They're in denial. They don't have a full, deep understanding of how fragile life is and how much risk there is and how much suffering there is out there. Right? This is why Jesus attended to those suffering the most. This is why Buddha, the beginning of Buddha's path to enlightenment, was as a prince, as a son of wealth and privilege. He went out into the world and walked and was like just struck and overwhelmed with, oh my God, there's so much suffering. That poor homeless man starving, that woman who only has one arm, that child who has no parents, that dog, limping along, that was hit by, like, whatever, like, it just, the world is full of suffering. Well, guess what, traumatized person? You're right. And they're unaware. You can't be them. You can't unsee what you've seen. You can't unknow what you've known. But you don't have to stay in this deeply traumatized state, confused and overwhelmed, where you've taken all the world's suffering and dumped it into your body and into your brain. Because if you're doing that, you're not doing the one thing you are responsible for, and that is for taking care of your body and your brain. And that means tuning in over and over and over to all the beauty that's out there too. But that also means being the beauty. And traumatized people have a hard time with this because we've been victimized over and over and over until we become this passive object of cruelty. And we can't imagine being an assertive presence of beauty. That's a complete flip. We've been traumatized over and over and over until we have learned helplessness. We don't even know what it means to activate and to become a presence. And it can take decades. It took for me decades to retrain my nervous system to go, don't just receive. Start taking up space and going, I'm going to create beauty. I'm going to create love. I'm going to create connection. I'm going to create a podcast and say what the fuck I have to say. Right? The only path. You can't go back and be in denial about reality, and you can't stay in a traumatized state. It's a life of misery and suffering. The only path forward is to accept those people don't know. If you want to say they're full of crap, okay, say they're full of crap. They don't know. And some of them are just traumatized and deeply in denial because that's how they cope. But you do know. Your eyes are open. You know that life is fragile. But that also means life is precious. And there's a deep beauty in that. So start appreciating the deep beauty in that. Rescue a spider. Don't sit there and go like, oh my God, yeah, but all the spiders in the world, and there's probably some kid burning a spider with a... No, stop. Don't do the world. Just do you. And if you're the one who's sitting there and you're going to give your kid a bath and there's a daddy long legs that made it in there, don't just run the hot water and wash it down. Get yourself a cup, gently scoop it out, put it in your garage. Let it live in there. Come on, I dare you. It's awesome sauce. Come on, I dare you. Start doing it as a policy. I don't have control of the world, but anything that comes within my sphere, I want to share love and connection and comfort and creativity and presence. I want that daddy long legs to know the presence of a loving being who says, if you have a chance at comfort and to live out your instincts and your life in a way that doesn't end in fear and suffering, maybe you get to die of old age, whatever that is for a daddy long legs, I'm going to participate in that. I want to give that, because not only, or maybe more importantly than how good that is for the daddy long legs, what that does to your own brain and body. You begin to become a source of presence and love and creativity and connection. All the things that you were denied by your trauma, you're now giving yourself. You understand? Like, this is integral to the healing process. It's the only way out. Clinically, therapeutically, psychologically, physiologically, it's the only way out. Scientifically, medically, it's the only way out. You can't sit there and just be angry at the monolith. Not going to help you. You've already done that probably for years. You can't just sit there and be traumatized. You can, but people who do that live entire lives of misery. They live into old age, just nothing but, and they become bitter, ugly people. That's not nice. They become people who hurt people. Let me restate it. You don't want to do that. So what are the options? The only option, even if you only believe in it physiologically, is to go, I was given this. I was given this brain. I was given this central nervous system. I was given this heart, this tummy, this body, this biology. I was given this consciousness and this experience for whatever amount of time I have. Trauma may have done everything it could to separate me from myself and to separate me from my opportunities to be love and to be loved, to see and to be seen, to be with and to be accompanied by, to feel creativity and to create, right? To be spirit and to experience inspiration. Trauma separated me from that. Whatever time I have, there's nothing else to do but to give myself that in every moment I can. And sometimes it means, you're driving and you're not going to stop and pick up that stray dog because you're tired about, no, that's okay. Go home and take care of you. Go home and take care of first the thing you were given to care for, the thing you were given that is the one thing that you actually were given, that people tried to separate you from, that your trauma tried to separate you from. Care for it. And out of that does come a spiritual truth. That the only way to do it is to begin inviting and embodying love within yourself. Love me. I love you. I love that daddy long leg. Ooh, that insect is kind of gross. Okay, I'm going to accept my grossness. I apologize for my grossness. You're beautiful. I know in reality, you're a living thing and you're beautiful. And I'm sorry that I'm so limited that I don't get it. I love you. Oh my God, that feels better. That feels better. That feels better. That feels better. I think it's from the Hawaiian tradition. I love this thing, right? Where you can just hold people in your mind, or maybe people that made you angry, or people that didn't, or people that you hope have healing. And I think, if I remember correctly, I apologize if I get this wrong. You just say, I'm sorry. Please forgive me. And all you're saying is, I'm a limited being and I don't know enough and I'm not big enough and strong enough to rescue you or even to love you. Or maybe I have feelings of resentment or hatred, like whatever. Just, I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I love you. You're beautiful. I love this. One of my favorite things ever. How cool is that? I once had an experience with a parking guy who didn't give me a ticket, but he was just one of those people who's just kind of douchey about how they talk to you in a really weird, he just did some weird stuff that it's clear that he was uncomfortable and he was taking a moment to sort of posture up on me. And I got stuff like that. I'm raised in a culture that hates that, and traumatized people who are abused by their parents also like just have a real problem with authority that just burns me up. I don't care because I know the way. I know the way. I don't care. Okay, you and I together, with me together. Okay, I'm going to hold his image in my mind. Whatever he was expressing, whatever it was, wherever it came from, whatever limitations he might have, I can just say to him, I'm sorry, please forgive me. You know why I'm saying that? I don't know what he's been through. I don't know why he needs to cope that way. It might be a desperate need. And it had nothing to do with me. And yet, I have demonized him in my own mind, on and off since then. Think about it, get angry, like, what a jackass. Okay, no. You and me together, you and I together. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I love you. You're beautiful. You see? You see what happens? Come on, you guys. Hey, traumatized people, you want power? You feel disempowered. You feel stripped of your power, and you feel stripped of your identity. You feel stripped of your right to life. You feel stripped of your ability to assess risk reasonably. You feel stripped of your ability to just be a well-balanced person who can pursue things and enjoy your day. You feel stripped by depression and anxiety and PTSD and misery and people behaving shitty. Like, you want a way forward? You want a path forward? Let's do it again. You and me. We'll do it together. Come on. Come on. I promise you, it's the best thing ever. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I love you. You're beautiful. I don't remember the order. It doesn't matter. Please forgive me. I'm sorry. I love you. You're beautiful. Superpower, son. Come on. Come on and get some. Superpower. Traumatized people. You're right. Those people have a limited awareness. That's fine. That's what was given to them. It limits their ability to understand what life is for a lot of people. And okay, don't be mad at them. And some of those people are just traumatized people in denial. You're right. Life is fragile and anything can happen to anybody, and you know it. And you're right. You're right. You're right. That's the truth of all of it. I gave us enough depressing examples in my own experience, and that doesn't even begin to cover the amount of suffering that I've seen. Not mine, just out in the world. I could spend days telling stories of suffering. Real, actual, not just like, oh, they felt bad or they were depressed, but I mean people who experienced terrible things. Here's the key. It's not the truth to then go, oh, if I'm right about how fragile life is and how dangerous it can be, that I should just stay in this miserable state of suffering. No, because that's making you something that you're not. It's making you a receptacle for an entire reality. And it's destroying you, and it will make you hateful, angry, and miserable, and you will begin to hurt people, and that's not who you are. That's not who you truly are. It's not who you are. So there's only one path left. That is the path to truth, beauty, love, connection. It is to just do this. Take care of the brain and the biology and the heart and the presence and the consciousness you were given for however long you have. Take care of that. And the better you get at it, the more it will flow. And then at some point, as you care for it, or as you care for other people, it will care for you. And as you care for you, it will care for other people. And at that point, the power of it will expand, will explode. And you will know something that you never imagined could have been true. That the greater, deeper truth is love, beauty, connection, creativity. Don't try to logic it. Don't do it. Just that's what's true. All right, you guys. I got incoming, holy crap, 10 minutes. That was a fun one. Took me a while to wake up. One more time. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I love you. You're beautiful. I love you guys. Talk to you next time.
Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay.